Welcome to this first Amplify Women in Research interview. I'm very pleased today to have Dr. Dawn Skelton with us. Dr. Dawn Skelton is an exercise physiologist at the Glasgow Caledonian University, where she's a professor in aging and health. She has an impressive CV. Her H-index is 46. She has over 5,500 citations and over 250 peer-reviewed papers, reviews, and book chapters. It's a very interesting career path where Dr. Skelton has chaired the Royal Osteoporosis Society Statement for Exercise and Osteoporosis. She's also chaired the Older People Panel for the UK Physical Activity Guidelines. And Dr. Dawn Skelton is also the director of Later Life Training Limited, which is a not-for-profit that trains exercise professionals to deliver physical activity and exercise to frail older adults and stroke survivors. Dr. Dawn Skelton recently received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the British Geriatric Society, and interestingly has an honorary doctorate, a medical doctorate, and honorary fellowships with physical therapy and physician societies in the UK. Thank you so much for being here this morning, Dr. Skelton. I'm so excited to have you as our inaugural guest on Amplify Women in Research. It's such an impressive CV and like a really exciting career path. What started it all and what got you here today?
Well, that's a really interesting one because I did a generic degree called human science, which doesn't even exist anymore in the university, and it allowed you to try a little bit of everything, which was probably great because at the time I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. But during that, I helped someone out, my lecturer, with some research. So I became a research assistant short term on a program she was looking at physical activity and growth and development in children. And I really liked this idea of collecting data and analysing, and I didn't do much of the analysing, admittedly, but it got me interested in research. Coming to the end of that degree, again, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had the same lecturer said, "Oh, I've got a friend that's looking for a PhD student to do some work on exercise with older people." And I did know that I could see a difference between fitter older people and not fit older people between my two grandparents. So I had two grandmothers, both in their late 90s. Both had lots of medical conditions. One just was a fidgeter. She was constantly on the move doing something. And the other one just sat in a chair. And the difference between them, mood, functionally, in all sorts of ways, was huge. So I suddenly went, you know, this could fly. This could be really interesting to find out. And when I started, because I'm a lot older than I look, exercise with older people, and particularly frailer older people, just wasn't done. There was concerns about heart attacks and all sorts of things. And so my PhD started off with looking at how well people do in terms of strength, function, and balance when they're healthy and older. So it took me 3 years to recruit enough healthy older people without medical conditions, without medications. Yeah. And that was just fascinating because, yes, there was a decline, aging still happens, but the healthy people were also much more physically active. So at this point, I started getting really interested in why people are active or not, and particularly the effect that medical conditions can have on whether somebody chooses to be active. And obviously a fantastic set of supervisors. I had Professor Archie Young, who was a geriatrician, and spent half his time still working in practice. So I often heard him talking about patients and that sort of thing. And Carolyn Gregg, who was a physiologist, and those two really enthused me and inspired me. And I've never looked back since.
It's funny you say that back then they weren't doing a lot of exercise with older adults. I think we sort of forget that, don't we? Like there was when cardiac patients were told to sit and not exercise, right? So we sort of take for granted now that everyone's on board to provide physical activity. And
for my first exercise study where we were looking at strength training, I had to have a medic in the room for every single session. They had to wear hip protectors, they had to, you name it. I mean, the amount of safe, and I'm surprised any of them came and joined the trial, to be honest. But now look, and so yes, and that's the value of research, to realise that actually there is only benefit from exercise with older adults. but going back 20 years, that really wasn't known. And my other inspiration was a lady called Maria Fiataroni, who had done some work in care homes, a very small, non-controlled study, but she'd done high-intensity strength training. Any problems or any health issues. It was very small, but again, at that point, even I went, wow, even the care home residents, whereas now it's expected that we should be mobilizing care home residents. So yeah, the value of research is that you can change the whole landscape with good, robust research.
And what's really cool is that one of your graduate projects was the one that sort of changed that landscape. And
I know.
One of your most cited papers, isn't it?
And that still shocks me that it's still cited, actually, because there have been so many studies since which were better done, because if you go back 25 years, we didn't do anything as robustly as we do now. And so I'm still really quite impressed that people still cite it. But and most people don't expect their PhD papers to get high citations now. And so I still want to pat my back a little bit, and my supervisors as well, of course. I think I had 25 drafts for that first paper, if I remember rightly. So the important thing here is if you're lucky enough to stumble across a new area, then yes, you will probably live off your citations for many years to come. And I was lucky in that I was relatively early in that sort of pathway of working with frailer older people.
Well, and it's nice because it set you up with a new area of expertise, right? So you could sort of lead the path a bit. And it led you to that study, the other one that you sent me, which was this huge multi-site trial.
Yes. That
it just seemed like a massive undertaking, and said that it hasn't really had the uptake you hoped for, which is kind of ironic.
No, that's an interesting one. It was called the PROACT, as in, obviously getting active, 65 plus. And the whole point here was to actually, and it's still the only study which is compared to already published falls prevention interventions, so to actually put them head to head in the same population, and have a control group which were just given advice leaflets. The main outcome actually wasn't falls. The main outcome was habitual physical activity, because our premise was that if someone is unsteady or unconfident in moving, they're not, no matter what you do, they're not going to become more active, because they're going to become fearful or concerned about a fall. So the point of putting a falls prevention intervention in rather than a general exercise intervention was to make them feel steadier and see whether that had an effect on their habitual physical activity. And so, number one, it also is the biggest research study in falls to consider physical activity as an outcome. I think it's because it was in that period of time, which we're still in actually, where there was an exponential growth of publications on falls prevention. I mean, when I first started Profane, which was a European funded project that I was scientific coordinator for, I used to read literally every research paper that came out every week on falls, anything to do with falls. And, I was really, really up to date. And eventually about, 2 months into the project, I went, I can't do it. I physically can't keep up. And I think Stephen Lord once published a paper just showing the rise, where we were getting, 150, 200 more papers a week on falls. So it came out in amongst that, and I think it's just got lost in the, and it was a huge undertaking. It was nearly 1,300 patients recruited through GP practices. It was a hard undertaking, and it's the longest follow-up that we've had on a falls prevention study, because we followed them up for 2 years post-intervention. So I'm a little bit upset that doesn't get any more citations than it does, I must admit. I'm not the first author, so it is not, but it just seems a shame. And I think it was lost in that exponential growth of papers, and no one can quite keep up with what's coming out on
There's
falls.
So much research coming out, right? You think you've got a cool new idea or a great new project and it's already been published. But I think I was really impressed when I saw the protocol paper for the one that you're talking about. And I'll link it to the video anyway. We'll see if we can amplify it a bit, because it was such a huge undertaking and great process and research. It should be cited more for sure. So along the way, like through that project and some of the other projects you've done, were there some researchers or up and coming women in research that you think will be the ones to lead the way going forward?
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Of course, we always are going to talk about the people we've worked most closely with. And so, you know, the few people I mention, I've no doubt people will go, why didn't she mention me? You know, but, you know, I think there's some really interesting stuff coming out in the potential or added value of the digital opportunities that might go alongside, and in particular how we might increase dose on top of face-to-face contacts, because we know home exercise on top of your weekly class is vital. And so those two people working at the University of Manchester, Emma Stanmore is doing a lot of work with the Connect platform and also iPads and things, and Helen Hawley Haig, who's developed a really nice interactive app which physiotherapists or exercise instructors can use to help motivate people throughout their programs, and they're really coming at it from quite a different angle. It's really all about motivation, and so and co-production. So everything they do with older people, with services, so that they are intuitive, easy to use, etc. So I think keep an eye out for them. I'm really interested in the work that Alexandra Mavridi is doing at Strathclyde University. Hers is not really so much falls, but it's related. It's bone health and sedentary behaviour, and in particular whether fractures and things will differ if you're particularly sedentary. And again, that's a really new area of research, because although sedentary behaviour is growing in papers, a bit like falls prevention, we haven't quite got into bone health yet. That's still a very new area. So I'm really excited to see what happens with that, particularly as I'm very interested in working with people with osteoporosis. So I think, you know, it'd be really good to keep an eye out. And last but not least is actually one of my PhD students who hasn't sat her Viva yet, but is about to take up a job in BC, and her interest is in feet. And particularly, I know you might go, but let's face it, feet are not just important to stay upright, they're moving. And if you have sore feet, poor foot function, you again will not be confident and competent to be active. So she in particular is interested in how we would look at cultural differences in the way we present information.
Interesting.
And so health literacy is different in different countries, as is normal literacy, but also how you present that sort of information to different cultures and different people in different countries. So I mean, I think it'd be good to keep an eye out for them.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that knowledge translation piece and the way you put these messages together is so important, which is why that work that you're doing with Later Life Limited is so important, right? Like, to be able to take the research and translate it into meaningful programs like that are evidence-based is so important. We definitely need that. So
the longer in my career, the more I've realized, and actually twice in the last 3 months, I've had conversations with people about potential new ideas for research. And I've just said, stop right now. Do you actually think that idea could ever really be implemented? Yeah. And there's a deathly silence. And I go, I'm not going to get involved. If it hasn't got the potential to change the face of what we do with people, I mean, yes, there is still a place for research for the sake of research, but to be honest, in the physical activity world, because we've been talking about it for 30 years, and yet if you look out there, our rates of physical activity participation are not going up, they're going down. It's all about changing things now, and I think research in physical activity and in falls should be only aimed at things that we know we might have a chance of implementing to make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we all know that physical activity is good for us at this point. What we need now is physical active. So that transition from showing that exercise is good to showing that we can get people to do it is going to be what's critical.
Absolutely.
Forward. So I guess we'll start to wrap it up with a couple of final questions here. What would you say then, looking back, would be your greatest contribution to the field, whether it's research or programming?
I believe it or not, I think my move into working with has had the biggest have been able to, with colleagues, train huge numbers of professionals. We've trained 3,500 postural stability instructors that work across the UK, and we've also done a lot of training in Europe, taking Otago, which is not my original program, but taking that out to 13 different European countries now. So my biggest feeling of proud is actually taking it into the practice rather than doing the original research. It doesn't mean I love research still, but I have moved much more into trying to ensure that things that actually go out to the public are evidence-based. And so I'm very quick to pick up on programs that say they're falls prevention. I go, where's the research paper to show it? Because I think now that's where I certainly will stay now in my career. It'll be all about trying to influence policy and practice. And within that, my biggest cheer to myself, I guess, is sitting down with a couple of who've become really good friends and are actually directors of later life training as well, back in the early 90s, trying to devise that falls program in the first place, wanting it to still meet ACSM guidelines, and so to have all the components of fitness in there, that you should give a rounded program, but obviously with an emphasis on strength and balance. And looking back, I'm just so pleased I didn't just go down it's all strength and balance. There is work on aerobic capacity, there is work on flexibility, floor work, etc. So I still feel that the contribution to a holistic falls prevention exercise program is probably my best bit of impact in terms of changing practice.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, you've had an impact on so many people through that programming, right? Like it's such a great feeling, right? Going out into the community and seeing it put to
Absolutely.
Right? Like it's such a great feeling.
Absolutely.
So we'll end on hopefully a great feeling. Do you have a message or some words of wisdom for the up and coming women out there who, maybe in the trenches right now, or
that's my
discouraged on occasion? But
funny enough, when I was thinking about this, I mentor a lot of women in science through Aurora and STEM programs in the UK, and one of the first things they say is, how did you get to where you got to? Well, for a start, I'm not married, I don't have children, that wasn't a choice. I didn't make a choice between my research and my work life, and my sort of work-life balance. But one of the things that I will always say is women are very good at multitasking, doing many things at once. So it's a renowned female trait.
Yeah.
And we're not very good at saying no, which is also another renowned female trait. And I have suffered this, and I don't want other people to. Of course, it's lovely as you're starting to become more well-known. You get invited onto a lot more things. And a lot of them are interesting. They're not necessarily directly in your area of interest, but they're interesting. If you take on too many of those, you won't do what you want to do well, and you'll do everything it just won't be enough time in the day. So the first thing I'd say is look around and say, is everything I'm involved in important to me? Not just because somebody asked me, but yes, it's important to get things onto your CV, but actually, if you're not careful, you'll get swamped with so much that you won't do anything well. And also, although admittedly I've fallen into this by mistake, I'm renowned for my falls prevention. But if you look at my publications, at least half are not falls prevention. So I've wandered off. It's always been about physical activity in older people in some way. And I've enjoyed being part of those, and I've met some great people by being involved in other teams but I guess just be kind to yourself. And if your main aim is to become renowned in a particular field, just make sure you focus a bit more around that. And I guess the other thing is, if you really want to be fulfilled, it is to try and get something that you've done into practice, because honestly, it is the most fulfilling feeling. This Make Movement Your Mission that we're doing at the moment during coronavirus, where we're doing live movement snacks. later life training don't normally have direct contact with older people. We train the people that train the older people. And it's absolutely amazing to hear some of the comments back about literally changing people's ability to move, and more importantly, their physical literacy. They understand why they want to do it that way, for example. And doing that, honestly, it's 3 times as good as getting a paper published. it feels fantastic. And, you know, so be kind to yourself, try and do something that you know will have an impact on the people that you want it to impact on. And it may be professionals, it may be older people, it may be adults, you know, whatever the population is. Just try and think beyond the confines of what your university will be wanting, which is your publications and your and try and sort of bring in that practice element, even if it's just working more closely with stakeholders, with organisations that work with your population group that you're interested. Because number one, you might not be researching something that's of any interest to them, and therefore it won't get out there.
Exactly.
So, you know, more co-creation, and you just feel part of a community, which is a lovely feeling. So that would be my message to up and coming female scientists. You know, bring yourself in as part of a nice warm team where everybody can support, but also you've got different disciplines and different viewpoints, because we can become a bit blinkered, and so it's really good to have a nice wide group of interests and skills around you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I wish somebody had said it to me 10 years ago. When you know, when you're getting started, and it's exactly what you said, you feel like you have to say yes to everything because you have to build your CV and you have to get tenure or whatever the case is. And so you just say yes to everything, and all of a sudden you have a CV where you're like, what am I doing? I'm all over.
Who am I?
Yeah, who am I? And then, you know, in time, like you said, you start to hopefully find those areas that excite you and give you some meaning, right? And then you stick with those. So I think in order to have a sustainable career in research, you have to find what, you know, makes you want to come to work every day, right? So
absolutely, it should be enjoyable. You know, we as researchers, we work very long hours, and not normally in work hours either. It's a lot outside of that. So it's got to be something you're really passionate about.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise it becomes a grind rather than a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, and I think the be kind message is so important too, because everyone outside of academia is always so appalled that we are constantly criticizing each other anonymously in academia, right? So
Absolutely.
I think it's important to be kind to each other whenever we can be, and even when we are providing reviews, to try and be as kind as we can, because, you know, we're all just trying our best. And
constructive criticism, shall we say?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I think this is going to be important, and I hope we can motivate and encourage some women out there to keep research in this area, because I'm so glad that I ended up in this area myself. So hopefully we can help some other women stay in the field.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Lovely to talk to you, Shilpa.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.